The wine was red, the candlelight was soft, and the conversation flowed with the easy comfort of a shared history. James held Laura's hand across the table, his thumb stroking her knuckles. A whole year had passed since they stood on a tropical beach and promised each other forever. Their first anniversary felt like a victory lap, a celebration of a love story so perfect it belonged in a movie. Laura laughed, her face glowing in the warm light, and James thought not for the first time how lucky he was. They were a perfect match, a quiet, dependable engineer and a vibrant, beautiful graphic designer. A love story for the ages, but even the most perfect stories have a single, ugly page. A year ago, on their honeymoon in Bali, a different scene had played out. The air was thick with humidity and anger. They were in a small bungalow, the moon a sliver of silver outside their window. Laura's phone buzzed with a message, and for the first time James saw something flicker in her eyes he didn't recognize, a panicked, cold dread. He had reached for her hand, asking what was wrong, and she had recoiled as if burned. A fierce, sudden argument had erupted. Her voice, usually soft and melodic, had been sharp, defensive. "It's nothing, James. Leave it alone," she had hissed, and the fight had ended as quickly as it began, leaving a bitter, unspoken residue. He had chalked it up to wedding stress and exhaustion, a momentary crack in their perfect facade. Now, a year later, the memory was a faint whisper, a shadow on their otherwise flawless romance. But the shadow was about to come to life. As they finished their celebratory dinner, Laura's phone buzzed on the table. She picked it up, her smile still in place, but James saw her eyes narrow as she read the message. Her expression hardened, and a flash of that same cold dread from their honeymoon returned. She quickly put the phone down and turned it over, face down on the mahogany table. "Who was that?" he asked, his voice casual. She didn't look at him. "Just an old friend," she said, her tone a little too casual, a little too quick. "They're a bore." She changed the subject and picked up her wine glass, but the lie hung in the air, a sour note in their sweet melody. And the silent, cold phone lay between them like a hidden landmine. The text message had been a quiet pinprick, but the air around them still felt sharp and charged. For the next few weeks, a subtle distance grew between James and Laura. Her once effortless laughter became a little forced, her eyes a little more guarded. She held her phone closer, answered calls in hushed tones, and spent her evenings staring into a screen with a furrowed brow, a habit he had never seen before. The perfect melody of their marriage was starting to sound dissonant, a harmony broken by unspoken chords. The tension culminated on a rainy Saturday afternoon. Laura was out running errands, and James, feeling a gnawing curiosity he couldn't suppress, decided to organize the hall closet. It was a chore he'd been putting off, a small, mundane task to distract him from the growing paranoia. As he pulled a pile of old blankets from a top shelf, a small, unassuming shoebox slipped from its perch and fell to the floor, its contents spilling out. A jumble of letters tied with a ribbon, a few faded postcards, and a stack of old photographs. He knew he shouldn't look, but he couldn't stop himself. He picked up a photo from the top of the pile. It was Laura, younger, her smile wider and more genuine than the one she wore today. She was laughing, her arm wrapped around a man. He was handsome, with dark hair and a confident, easy smile, a smile that made James's stomach clench with an unfamiliar feeling. He thumbed through the other photos. In every one it was the same man. They were in different places, at different times, but the intimacy between them was undeniable. He was a familiar stranger. James couldn't place him. But the man's face felt like a forgotten word on the tip of his tongue. A cold dread settled in his chest. It wasn't just the photos. It was the fact that she had hidden them. These weren't casual pictures of a family friend. These were a testament to a deep, profound connection, and she had kept them a secret. A low, humming anger began to build inside him. The man's face, a ghost from her past, suddenly felt like a threat to his present. He heard the key turn in the lock, and he quickly shoved everything back into the box. He didn't have time to put it away. Laura walked in, her face bright, her smile a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside him. Their perfect life was now a fragile facade, and he knew it was only a matter of time before it all came crashing down. The tension in the air was a physical presence, a wall between them. Laura's smile, once a source of light for James, felt like a deliberate act, a performance she was putting on just for him. He had tucked the shoebox back into the closet, but the image of her with that other man was seared into his mind. He found himself watching her, studying her, looking for cracks in the perfect facade. He felt a deep, unsettling shame, a sense of guilt for his own suspicion, even as his paranoia grew. He was so consumed with his own unease that he was completely unaware of the shadow that had just entered their lives. Miles away, in a small, cluttered office filled with stacks of old case files and dusty photographs, Detective Miller sat hunched over a desk. He was a retired homicide detective, a man with more gray hairs than a beard. The case that had haunted his retirement was nearly a year old. It was a cold case officially, but for Miller, it was an open wound. The disappearance of a young, promising artist named Alex. Everyone, including the local police, had written it off as a runaway. But Miller had a different theory. He believed it was a murder. The last person to see Alex was his girlfriend. She was an enigmatic, beautiful young woman who had answered all his questions with a strange, unnerving calm. She had claimed Alex had a history of leaving without a word, a story that felt hollow and rehearsed. Miller had pressed her, but she had a rock-solid alibi and a perfect facade. Her name was Laura. The case had gone cold, and Miller had been forced to let it go. But the girl's face, her strange, placid eyes, had stayed with him, a constant presence in his restless nights. Now, a year later, Miller's instincts were screaming. He had just received an anonymous tip, a grainy photograph attached to an email with a short, cryptic message, "Look again." The photograph showed a woman who looked exactly like the one who had walked into his interrogation room a year ago. She was laughing, her arm wrapped around a different man this time. The man with his kind eyes and trusting smile was completely oblivious. Miller zoomed in on the photo, his old eyes fixed on the couple. He looked from her face to the man's, and a cold certainty settled over him. He had found her again. And this time, he was going to find out what really happened to Alex. The quiet suburban life of James and Laura was about to be shaken to its core. James stood in the hallway, the shoebox of photographs in his hands. The photos, once a simple discovery, now felt like evidence, a collection of crimes against his heart. He couldn't keep silent any longer. The image of Laura laughing with that other man was a corrosive acid, eating away at the trust he had so carefully built. He went to the living room and found her on the sofa, scrolling on her phone, her face illuminated by the soft light. He placed the box on the coffee table with a soft thud. Her head snapped up, a flicker of irritation in her eyes. "What's this?" she asked, her voice cool and guarded. "I think you know," he said, his voice low and strained. He opened the box and pulled out a handful of the photos, fanning them out like a deck of cards. "Who is he, Laura?" She looked at them and her expression changed. The irritation was replaced by a quick, panicked mask. A second later, it was gone, replaced by a look of manufactured confusion. "James, what is this?" "I don't understand." "The pictures, Laura, the ones of you and this man." "Who is he?" He pressed, his voice rising with a desperate edge. She picked up a photo, her movements slow and deliberate. She smiled, a brittle, unconvincing smile. "Oh, him? That's just Alex, an old family friend. My aunt's neighbor's son. We grew up together. I had no idea you were so jealous." She laughed, a short, hollow sound that didn't reach her eyes. The casual dismissal was an insult. "Don't lie to me, Laura. These aren't just pictures of a friend. There's an intimacy here. And why would you hide them?" Her entire demeanor shifted. The laughter vanished, replaced by a cold fury. "Why are you going through my things, James? This is a violation. I'm allowed to have a past. What, am I supposed to erase my life before I met you?" Her voice was tight with an emotion he couldn't place. It wasn't sadness or guilt. It was a furious, controlled rage. The emotional response was so disproportionate to the accusation that a chill ran down his spine. He looked at her, at the stranger standing before him, her eyes hard and cold. He didn't know this woman. The Laura he married was kind, gentle, and open. This woman was defensive and volatile, her face a mask of lies. The chasm between them had just become an unbridgeable canyon. He realized he was no longer just suspicious. He was afraid of the secrets she was keeping, and afraid of the person she might actually be. He had the photos, but he was no closer to the truth. In fact, her lies had pushed him farther away. The silence in the house was a heavy blanket. Laura had retreated to the bedroom, and James was left in the living room, the shoebox of photos a grim monument to her lies. He knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that Alex was no mere friend. Her furious, disproportionate reaction had confirmed it. He felt sick, not just with anger, but with a bone-deep sense of betrayal. He was going to find out the truth, even if it meant tearing down the beautiful life they had built. He went to his study, a room filled with blueprints and design sketches, and turned on his computer. He started his own investigation. The man in the photos was an enigma. He was handsome, with dark hair and a confident, easy smile. James stared at his face, trying to place him, trying to shake the feeling that he had seen him before. He had to be a public figure, someone who would have been in the news. He began to search using details from the photographs, the landmarks in the background, a distinctive sign on a building. Nothing. Frustrated, he switched tactics. He went back to the only clue he had, the name Laura had so casually thrown at him. Alex. He typed Alex, disappearance, and Laura's hometown into the search bar. The results were a flood of unrelated news articles, a sea of white noise. But then, a headline from a small local newspaper caught his eye. Young artist Alex Harrison vanishes. Police suspect foul play. His heart pounded. The date on the article was exactly a year ago, around the time he and Laura had met. He clicked on the link and began to read. The story detailed the disappearance of a young, promising artist who had gone missing after a heated argument with his girlfriend. The article described the girlfriend as an enigmatic, beautiful woman who had been the last person to see him. There was no picture of the girlfriend, but there was one of Alex Harrison. James's breath caught in his throat. He stared at the photograph on the screen, his hand trembling. It was the same man. The man from the shoebox, the man with the confident smile. Alex Harrison. The same man Laura had dismissed as a family friend. The realization was a gut punch, a cold, hard truth that knocked the air from his lungs. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a lie. A deep, carefully constructed lie that went beyond a past relationship. He knew, with a grim certainty, that he had just uncovered the first clue to a truth far darker and more sinister than he could have ever imagined. James stared at the news article on his screen, the blurry photograph of Alex a constant haunting presence. The truth was no longer a matter of opinion or speculation. It was a matter of public record. He printed the article, the paper trembling in his hand, a testament to his mounting rage. The woman he loved had built their entire marriage on a foundation of lies. He felt a deep, chilling coldness settle over him, an emptiness where his trust and love for her had once resided. He found her in the kitchen, casually humming a song as she unloaded the dishwasher. The domestic scene, once a source of comfort, now felt like a grotesque parody. He walked over to her and placed the printout on the counter. The humming stopped. The smile on her face slowly evaporated, replaced by a guarded, tense silence. "Who is Alex Harrison?" he asked, his voice low and dangerous. Laura looked at the article, her eyes scanning the headline. She flinched, her composure shattering like glass. Her hands holding a wine glass began to tremble. "I don't know," she whispered, her voice a fragile lie. "I've never seen him before." "Don't lie to me, Laura," he said, his voice rising with a desperate edge. "You told me he was an old friend. This article says he's a missing man, a victim of foul play. The last person to see him was his girlfriend. The police suspect a crime of passion." He pointed at the paper. "Was he your ex-fiancé? And was the argument on our honeymoon about him?" The perfect veneer finally cracked. Laura dropped the wine glass and it shattered on the floor, the sound a sharp, deafening punctuation. She stared at him, her body shaking, tears streaming down her face. "Yes," she whispered, her voice a raw, broken thing. "He was my fiancé, and the argument was about him. He called me on our honeymoon. He told me he was with someone else. He had been cheating on me our entire relationship. He was going to leave me for her." She began to sob, her body convulsing with pain. "It broke me, James. It completely shattered me. I had a mental breakdown. I couldn't bear to tell you the truth. I was so afraid you'd think I was broken. The last thing I wanted was for you to know I was just a messy, traumatized person who had been used and betrayed. Her confession was a torrent of sorrow and vulnerability, a masterpiece of emotional manipulation. She was a victim, a fragile, broken woman who had been betrayed, not a liar who had hidden a dark secret. He looked at her, at the tears now streaming down her face, and felt a rush of guilt. He had been so blind, so quick to judge. The power dynamics had shifted, and he was the one on the defensive, apologizing for his suspicions. He had a piece of the truth, but he now realized it was a poisoned chalice. The shattered glass on the floor was the only physical evidence of the confrontation. The emotional aftermath was far more damaging. Laura, on her knees, her tears and confession a powerful weapon, had masterfully turned the tables. James, who had started the night as the accuser, now felt like the villain. He had questioned his wife, the woman who had just confessed to a harrowing trauma, and he was filled with a suffocating, paralyzing guilt. The anger that had fueled him was gone, replaced by a desperate need to fix things. Laura, sensing his shift, played her part with theatrical perfection. She sobbed, burying her head in her hands, her body shaking with what appeared to be genuine sorrow. "I'm so sorry, James," she said, her voice muffled and raw. "I just wanted to be a clean slate for you. I didn't want my past to ruin our beautiful future. Can you ever forgive me for not trusting you enough to tell you?" The words were a knife twisting in his heart. It wasn't about her lying. It was about his failure to be a safe enough space for her. He knelt and pulled her into his arms, a deep sense of responsibility settling over him. In the days that followed, the dynamic between them changed completely. Laura, once the vibrant, independent partner, became fragile and emotionally dependent. She clung to him, her eyes wide with a manufactured vulnerability. She couldn't sleep alone. She needed his constant reassurance. She would bring up her trauma in hushed tones, reminding him of what she had gone through, silently guilt-tripping him into taking care of her. He found himself walking on eggshells, afraid that any wrong move would trigger another emotional breakdown. The roles had reversed. He was no longer the suspicious husband, but the devoted caretaker, his own needs and feelings pushed aside in favor of her fragility. He was so consumed with tending to her that he stopped thinking about the gaps in her story. He stopped questioning why she had lied about her past or why the photograph of Alex was so deliberately hidden. Her emotional manipulation had become a thick fog, clouding his judgment and blinding him to the truth. The love story that was once a partnership had become a power play, and he didn't even realize he had lost. He was under her control and she knew it. The only thing that could save him was a truth he hadn't uncovered yet. James was so lost in the fog of Laura's emotional manipulation that he failed to notice the email in his spam folder for days. The subject line was cryptic, regarding the disappearance of Alex Harrison. He almost deleted it thinking it was spam, but a gut feeling made him pause. He opened it and saw a short message from Detective Miller, the man from the news article. The detective had found him through a mutual contact and wanted to talk. James, still grappling with the emotional wreckage of Laura's confession, felt a flicker of the old anger. He wanted answers, and this man seemed to have them. He agreed to meet Miller at a small diner on the outskirts of town. Miller was exactly as James had pictured him, a weary-looking man with kind eyes and a tired, knowing smile. He slid a worn manila folder across the table, its contents a stark contrast to the innocent chit-chat of the diner. "I've been working this case for a year, unofficially," Miller said, his voice low. "The police wrote it off as a runaway. I never bought it." James opened the file. Inside was a collection of meticulously organized documents, crime scene photos, and witness testimonies. He saw the name Laura Miller scrawled on a police report. He looked at Miller, his face a mask of confusion. "Why are you showing me this?" he asked, his voice trembling. Miller leaned in, his eyes unwavering. "Because the night Alex disappeared, a witness saw him arguing with a woman who matches your wife's description." A heated argument. The witness said the woman's car was a mess when she drove away, as if she'd been in a wreck. He paused, letting the information sink in. "I believe Alex was the victim of a crime of passion." James's blood ran cold. He remembered Laura's tearful confession about Alex and the emotional breakdown it caused. But the witness testimony added a chilling new layer. It wasn't a mental breakdown that had led to an accident. It was a heated argument that had turned into something more. He read the police report again, his eyes scanning the detailed witness statement. The description of the woman, the time, the location, it all pointed to Laura. His wife wasn't just a traumatized victim. She was a suspect in a cold case. The realization was a gut punch. The tears, the emotional vulnerability, the entire performance had been a lie. She wasn't just hiding a past trauma. She was hiding a crime. And the power she held over him was not from her fragility, but from her silence. He had been so blind, so trusting. The chasm between them had just widened into an abyss. He was no longer a victim of emotional manipulation. He was an accomplice in a cover-up. The weight of the case file was a physical burden, its contents a cold, hard dose of reality. James sat in his car outside the diner, the documents splayed across the passenger seat like a trail of breadcrumbs leading to the truth. The witness testimony, the police reports, the grainy photographs, it all painted a picture of a woman he didn't know, a woman who was not a victim but a suspect. The perfect facade of their love story wasn't just cracked, it was a total fabrication. He turned to the last page of the file, a printout of an old engagement announcement from a local newspaper. The headline read, "Alex Harrison and Laura Miller to wed." His eyes scanned the article and he felt his stomach drop. The announcement was dated exactly 1 year and 1 month ago, a few weeks before he met her. The love story he believed was a slow burn, a beautiful, natural connection that had evolved over months of getting to know each other, was a lie. Their first date, their first kiss, their first anniversary, it was all a meticulously constructed performance. He had been a rebound, a distraction, a means to an end, a prop in her life to make her appear normal and happy after Alex's disappearance. He looked at the file, at the photograph of the smiling young artist, and a chilling thought settled over him. Alex hadn't just disappeared. He had vanished from her life just before she started a new one with James. His entire relationship, the foundation of his happiness, was built on the wreckage of another man's life. The betrayal was a suffocating weight. It wasn't just a lie about an ex-boyfriend. It was a lie about his entire marriage. The power dynamics of their relationship, the emotional manipulation, the careful vulnerability, it all made sense now. She had orchestrated it all to keep him close, to keep him from looking too deep, and to ensure her secret would remain hidden. He had been a pawn in her twisted game, an unsuspecting accomplice in her cover-up. The love he felt, the love he believed was real, was nothing more than a carefully constructed illusion. He had been living a lie, and the cost of his marital truth was far more than he had ever imagined. James walked through the front door, the case file a physical weight in his hand, and an emotional one in his heart. He didn't just feel betrayed. He felt like a fool. The love story he had cherished was a lie, a cover-up for a missing man, and a life she had carefully constructed to hide the truth. He found Laura on the sofa, scrolling through her phone, her back to him. The image of domestic peace was a stark contrast to the storm raging inside him. He didn't say a word. He just stood there, the silence a heavy, charged presence. She sensed his presence, her shoulders tensing, and slowly turned to face him. Her eyes, once so full of a feigned innocence, now held a cool, guarded defiance. She saw the case file in his hand, and her mask of fragility fell away completely. "So you talked to him," she said, her voice flat. "Miller?" "I did," James replied, his voice devoid of all emotion. "And I know the truth, Laura. Not about Alex disappearing. I know the truth about us, about our love story. You were engaged to him. You met me just a few weeks after he vanished. Our marriage was a lie, a performance. You didn't love me. You needed me. To be a distraction. To be your alibi." Laura's face contorted with a cold, pure rage. "A lie? You think this is a lie?" Her voice rose, a sharp, dangerous sound. The vulnerability was gone, replaced by a volcanic fury. She stood up, her hands clenched into fists. "You think you know everything because of some old file? You have no idea what it's like to have your life destroyed by a secret you can't control." Her words were a desperate, bitter roar. She was unraveling, her carefully constructed composure dissolving into a fit of raw emotion. The lie she had lived for a year had become a part of her, and his accusation had ripped it all away. "You want the truth, James?" "The real truth?" She screamed, tears of pure rage streaming down her face. Alex didn't just disappear. He was murdered. He's dead. And I didn't do it. But I know who did. The final words were a chilling, desperate confession, a shattering revelation that changed everything he thought he knew. The love story wasn't a lie. It was a cover-up. And he had just been told who was buried in the grave. Laura's desperate confession hung in the air. A final, chilling punctuation to a year of lies. James stood frozen, his mind reeling. He was murdered. And I know who did it. The words were a bitter poison, a truth far more sinister than he could have ever imagined. The anger he felt just moments ago was gone, replaced by a cold, disorienting shock. He stared at her, her face a raw canvas of rage and sorrow, waiting for the rest of the horrifying story. She sank back onto the sofa, her hands trembling as she brought them to her face. "It wasn't me, James," she whispered, her voice a broken, pleading thing. "It was my brother, Liam. We grew up together. He always looked out for me. When Alex told me he was leaving, Liam found out. He went to confront Alex to tell him to stay away from me, and they fought. Terrible, brutal fight. A new character, a new ghost from her past had just been revealed. A brother he had never heard about. A secret she had kept tucked away. Liam. The name resonated with a sudden, chilling familiarity. Laura had once mentioned an uncle who had passed away and left her some money. She had used that money to help them buy their house. He now realized that the money was not from an uncle, but from a brother. Brother who had a dark secret. Liam was volatile, she continued, her voice gaining a desperate, manic quality. He always had a temper. He saw Alex as a threat to our family's reputation. He saw him as a lowlife who was going to hurt me. I was there, James. I watched them fight. Liam shoved him and Alex fell. He hit his head on the coffee table. He was dead. Liam panicked. We had to do something. She looked at him, her eyes pleading for him to understand. We took him to the woods. We buried him there. It was a secret. A terrible, terrifying secret that only we shared. I lied to you, James, because I was so afraid Liam would hurt you if I told you the truth. He's possessive, volatile. He's dangerous. The perfect love story you think we had was my attempt to create a perfect life. A life so perfect that no one, not even Liam, would ever suspect what we had done. The truth was a brutal, gut-wrenching blow. It wasn't about a crime of passion. It was a cold, calculated cover-up between two siblings. Her brother had taken a life, and she had buried the secret. He stared at her, his mind reeling, the words a bitter confirmation of his worst fears. The perfect love story was not a love story at all. It was a brutal act of violence and a terrible lie, and he was now a part of it. The silence in the room was a heavy, suffocating blanket. The truth finally out in the open was a brutal, ugly thing. James stared at his wife, the woman who had just confessed to being an accomplice in a murder. The perfect love story he had believed in was nothing more than a carefully constructed lie to hide a crime. He felt a deep, wrenching pain in his chest, a mix of grief for the life he had lost and cold, hard clarity about the woman he had married. The time for denial was over. The time for a decision had come. He knew what he had to do. He could protect her. He could help her hide her secret, help her bury the truth for good. They could go back to the way things were, with one less lie between them. A dark secret they shared. It would be a future built on a lie, but it would be a future nonetheless. He could choose his marriage over justice. He could choose love over the truth. But as he looked at her, at the woman who had manipulated him, who had used him as an alibi, he knew he couldn't. He couldn't live a lie, not anymore. His life, his entire existence had been a performance for her, a prop in a play she had written to hide her sins. He had been a fool, and he was not going to be an accomplice. The cost of his marital truth was too high, and he was no longer willing to pay it. He took a deep breath, the decision a cold, hard certainty. "Get up, Laura," he said, his voice flat and final. "We're going to the police station." Her sobs stopped. She looked up at him, her eyes wide with a mix of disbelief and terror. "Why?" she whispered, her voice a raw, broken thing. "It's all over." "Because I'm not you," he said, his voice filled with a final, heartbreaking resolve. "And I can't live with your lie anymore." He just stood there, waiting for her to get up, a man who had chosen justice over his marriage, a man who had found the truth and was now ready to face its terrifying consequences.